Growing up, I was painfully shy and had a really hard time carrying on any kind of conversation in a group setting, let alone a large social gathering or giving a talk to a large group of people. These things would have been extremely difficult for me and something I avoided to the extreme. And I know this is not an uncommon thing. Public speaking for many people is terrifying. It ranks up there with fears of spiders as people's #1 fear or thing that they try to avoid in life. And now, while I'm certainly not any kind of award-winning national, international public speaker or anything like that, I am running a YouTube channel that gets a decent amount of views and is reaching a decent amount of people. And I have gotten some feedback that the way in which I communicate is well received. And I've gotten a lot of questions from people who are looking to expand their own public speaking skills on how I sort of got to this point where I can communicate in a clear and effective way that people can receive. So I want to talk today about sort of 4 things I did in my career that just by happenstance got me to this place where I can communicate effectively. And then 5 more principles that are just sort of, I would say, best practices within public speaking that I've applied to my life that I think have helped further my public speaking capabilities. So we're going to dive into that today. If you would like to expand upon your public speaking abilities, or it's something that you're just flat out terrified and you want to start to unpack how you could possibly incorporate things into your life that would make it less terrifying for you, stick around. We're going to go over that today. So without further ado, number 1, the first thing that came into my life that helped me to become a decent public speaker, I would say, started actually quite a while ago in my 10th grade honors English class with Dina Musselman. Mrs. Musselman, if you're out there, thank you. She was kind of what's the word? She drove an iron fist with English. She was a stern teacher, but she was really cool. And I'm very thankful because she gave me a lot of knowledge that has really helped me to become a good speaker. And it started with becoming a good writer. First and foremost with vocabulary. I still remember like studying at the 11th hour for all these crazy vocabulary tests that we had to have. But having a good vocabulary is also going to make you a great speaker because when you're speaking organically in something like this, where I'm not going off of a script, ums and ahs and buts and likes, all those words you try to avoid as a public speaker, they will naturally come out if you're not going off of a verbatim script. But if you do have a artillery of, that's one of the words that was probably on the list, artillery. If you have an artillery of good vocabulary words sort of worked into your ventricular activating system in your mind that you can draw off of, not by having to think so much about it, but it's just words that are in your everyday vocabulary that you're used to drawing upon, that's going to add to your effectiveness as a speaker. So you're not just saying repetitive words over and over, or you can have words of more interest. Certainly you don't want to be that person that draws from words that are not in layman's all the time, or we've all heard people that try to speak a little too fancy, if you will. You want it to be natural and words that you're used to using, and you want to use them in the right context. So having a strong vocabulary, especially if you are, my hat's off to you, anyone out there who's trying to speak in English as your 2nd or 3rd or 4th language, my hat's off to you. English is my native language, so it's very easy for me to speak in it. I do speak a little bit of French, and if I were to try and give a, say, public speech in French, I would fail miserably. So anyone out there who is trying to communicate in a 2nd or 3rd language than what is your native language, I give absolute credit to you, but of course, starting with a strong base of good vocabulary so you can describe things in an interesting and impactful way is a great place to start. And the second place there, or the second what happened off of that in my honors English class, is I became a pretty good writer, I would say, long before I reached the fear of public speaking. I got pretty strong and confident in my writing because I could just be in my little introvert world and write to myself and feel strong with that. And I would say the basis of where that strength came from is the good old-fashioned persuasive essay. If you've graduated high school, you probably had to write many persuasive essays, and that's just the traditional format of you kind of 5 paragraphs. You have your thesis statement or kind of your hook, what brings something the audience into whatever you're going to speak about. And then that leads into your thesis statement, which is really the point of what you're talking about. So for example, the hook of this video is me talking about having fear of public speaking when I was little, and the thesis statement is, or the topic of this video is, how I became a better public speaker. So in essence, as I was thinking about this, most of my YouTube videos are kind of structured around the traditional 5-paragraph persuasive essay that I got quite good at writing thousands of them, well, probably not thousands, but quite a few in high school and college, but particularly with my 10th grade honors English teacher. She drilled into us this sort of rubric of the having your thesis statement, and then the middle paragraphs are the supporting arguments and evidence to re-establish that thesis statement, and then you have your conclusion wrap up. And in thinking about it, though, not every video follows this format because I am always going off the cuff for the most part. Most of my videos are organized around this format. So if you're going to give a talk on something, rather than just having, okay, a broad topic and then trying to just shoot out whatever on that, you'll probably get a little lost and meander around and lose your audience or lose yourself. And then all of a sudden you can get to those freezing points of what the heck am I trying to say here? But if you sort of draft out, you don't have to write a full verbatim essay, but I like to work in bullet points. I'll get to that a little bit later. But if you sort of draft out the main thing you want to talk about, a couple points of supporting evidence to that, and then come back to the conclusion with it, having that sort of structure will give you direction for your talk. And initially, if you're really, really new to this and you feel totally terrified of speaking, I absolutely would recommend just write a 5-paragraph essay on anything you're interested in, or perhaps it's a talk you know you have to give in a few months, then sort of write out an essay about that talk, and using your artillery of vocabulary and weaving that in, and just practice writing out sentences. Your brain connects as you write, especially if you do handwriting. This is a fun fact, by the way. When you write by hand versus typing, which everyone types nowadays, but back 100 years ago when I was in high school, all of these essays I did have to write out by hand. When you write by hand, it creates certain neuro connections in your mind that will help ingrain things and will help you learn on a deeper and lasting level. So that's one thing. If you do have trouble remembering, maybe write out these essays initially by hand and just have fun with it. If you're not in school or this isn't something you need to particularly do for work, just do it when you have time. Treat it as a creative learning exercise, but getting comfortable really with writing as a tool of expressing yourself. And in particular, creative writing is great. I was never good at it, but persuasive writing, the argument writing, making a point, that's always a great way to communicate something, because oftentimes you don't always in school get to choose what you're writing about. But say if you're doing this exercise for fun at home, pick something you're passionate about, whether it's minimalism, which a lot of you here are, or environmentalism or whatever. If it's something that you have passion and interest about, it's already going to be a lot easier to write because there's an emotional connection to it, and you can practice structuring out your sentences in a way that are clear and concise and always coming back to the main point that you want to be speaking about. And once you get used to writing it over and over and over, coming to speak it is going to be a lot more natural of a progression. So that is sort of the first point of how I started to develop a inner vocabulary of, if you will, of personal expression, which leads me to point number 2. This is very different. If you're new to my channel and don't know, I spent the bulk of my early years of my career as a professional performing artist. I was a competitive synchronized swimmer, and then I went on to be in Cirque du Soleil, a Cirque du Soleil style show in Las Vegas, and then also was a dancer and aerialist in nightclubs and for big music events after that. So it was many, many years of being on stage, sometimes up to a couple, like 100,000 people. So a lot of people. And while I wasn't ever speaking, I was dancing or doing synchronous swimming or aerial work. It was all my body. The interesting thing about being on stage in front of thousands of people is you do have to use your body in a very animate way in order to tell a story. And while words weren't coming out of my mouth, there was definitely always emotion having to emanate from my body, and presence and energy projection. And one of the biggest things is eye contact. This is something that people have a extreme difficulty with during public speaking. And there's a balance with it, of course. If I were to say, look at you and stare at the camera like this all the time because I don't want to break eye contact, you would probably be very uncomfortable. But if I talked like this the whole time and never looked at you and was thumbing through my papers and kind of covering my face, you probably wouldn't be very compelled to listen either. So it's a balance. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know it's a mix between sometimes I'm looking here at an iPhone, which is weird, but pretending there's an audience in front of me. And other times, like I just did right now, sometimes I'll be closing my eyes or looking off to the side, or occasionally referencing notes if I have them, just because it's an internal process of thinking. And I like to think of it as it should be just like a normal conversation. When you're talking with your friends or your family or your boyfriend or spouse or whomever, you're not going to just stare them in the eyes like this all the time, especially say you're like on a first date really trying to connect and you're just like, hey, how are you? How was your day? You know, what do you do for a living? Like the person will probably get weirded out. But at the same time, if you're not making eye contact the whole time, a lot of you maybe know people that it's a sort of nervous tendency of theirs. They'll never look you in the eye and they'll be talking to you, but looking off to the side like this because they're just sort of terrified of that connection. So just try to feel natural with it. It should be a balance. It's natural when you're thinking like I'm doing right now to just look off to the side for a second, but try to keep coming back to that anchor point of your audience, connect with them. Sometimes you'll be looking at the group as a whole like this. Other times you'll find one person and maybe they're really like vibing with what you say. And so you just have that intimate connection with them in that moment. Be natural with it, try to feel flow with it, see where your energy is pulled to in the audience. And again, just try to treat it as if you're having a conversation with an intimate person in your life, where there is just going to be that natural ebb and flow of points of anchored eye contact and then off to the side or referencing your notes every once in a while, which is perfectly okay. The other big thing on stage that you have to have is, of course, when you're giving a public talk, you're probably not going to be dancing around or moving your body in the crazy ways that I was as a performing artist, but natural movement of the body is nice. If you're totally rigid and still like this, you're going to be uncomfortable and you're probably going to make your audience a little bit uncomfortable. So I particularly, because I did spend so many years as a performing artist, my arms are all over the place in my videos. And I necessarily think that's something I need to remedy. It's just how I communicate natural. That's the word I would keep coming back to, is what's natural for you. And when you're first starting out and in fear, standing all rigid might be natural, but eventually, again, it's coming back to that point of, well, how are you talking with someone you're very comfortable with in your life? Depending on what culture you're from, I know Italians and people from Latin America will talk a lot with their hands, very animated, and other cultures maybe not so much, but a little bit of movement in your body is going to make you feel more at ease and going to make your audience feel more at ease. And that may include walking around a little bit, or just, like I just itched my shoulder a couple minutes ago because it was itchy and I didn't want to just be distracted by an itch. And I don't think that, it's okay to be a human. If you have an itch, like scratch it, that's fine. There's a line between that and just like constantly fidgeting and fumbling because you're nervous, or playing with your hair. You maybe want to try to transcend those things, but it's just about feeling as at ease as possible. And so letting your body move how it will naturally move. Some things that maybe you could focus on that a lot of people maybe it's not natural for them, but it could become natural for you, are your energy and your posture. Another two really important things for being on stage. If you're slouched like this because you're really insecure and you don't feel good about yourself, you're going to be very small. So not only on a black and white level of you're shrinking yourself on a stage in front of a group of people, you want to be able to be seen, it also shrinks your confidence and your energy and your authority with which you're talking and speaking and projecting that energy. So you want to take up as much space as possible, and holding your shoulders back and thinking about, we now know this isn't total woo-woo, it's from quantum physics, your energy field can extend outside of your body. So a lot of times we think of, okay, my body just ends right here with, okay, my arm is however many inches long. I don't know. I know my height is, I'm 5'8", 5 foot tall, 8 inches. But imagining if you're especially giving a talk for, say, hundreds or thousands of people, you want to imagine your energy field extending beyond whatever your actual physical measurable limitations are and reaching out and extending to those people. And imagine your energy extending all the way to the back of that room. And this may sound, again, woo-woo to some people, but your energy field really can extend beyond your body. Exactly how far, I don't know. I'm not that embedded in science, but I know it's a thing. And even just from imagining that, taking up that space and projecting yourself and your voice outward is going to carry your message in a lot stronger with a lot more strength. And also when you're holding your body in such a way, and I'm sure if anyone has watched, other self-development type videos, it's not just for public speaking, but just for having more confidence in general in life, holding your body in such a way, they say fake it till you make it. Even if you are lacking self-confidence and insecure, if you hold your body like that, it's just going to keep reinforcing it, versus if you stand like a badass and like a confident man or woman or non-binary or lion or tiger or bear, whoever, if you hold yourself in such a way of, yes, I deserve to be here. Yes, I have something of strength to say that people want to hear. It's going to start reinforcing that energy pattern into your body, and you will start believing it. And then it's a positive feedback loop of gaining more confidence and then having more strength in what you're going to say. So that is point number 2. By the way, my hair, I do fidget with my hair oftentimes in video because it has a mind of its own and likes to get in my face. So I do apologize about that. And today is just one of those days where it really just wants to be here. So my apologies on that. Number 3, the next phase of my life that really sort of furthered my advancement in being able to speak to groups was becoming a teacher. After I mostly retired from being a performing artist, I was a teacher for competitive synchronized swimmer, working with anywhere from 8 to 50 kids at once, and then also dealing with parent meetings of 50 to 100 parents at once. And the cardinal thing that came out of this was having to speak to a group of people for hours and hours on end, which at first was quite daunting because, again, on stage I was in front of thousands of people, but not having to use my voice. But as a teacher, I absolutely had to use my voice. And while oftentimes I would ask students questions or ask them to repeat the instructions to make sure they got it, for the most part, as a teacher, you are leading the show, and our practices were sometimes up to 8 hours long. So that's 8 hours of leading the show for a group of people that are looking to you to get information and guidance. And the practice isn't up to the kids. The practice as a teacher is up to you. I was running the whole thing. So I was sort of forced into being able to use my voice for long periods of time and in a way that's communicating information effectively and clearly, and in most of the times I was hoping at least to be in an inspiring way as well, because nobody likes a boring teacher, especially in a competitive sport. My job was to motivate them and then to get them to push themselves beyond their limits. So I couldn't just be monotonous and just, I could, but I would be a crappy teacher if I did that. I had to communicate in a way that was vibrant and exciting and would push these kids to want to keep doing well. So the main way that was able to come about was I was teaching about something that I had extreme knowledge in. I was teaching competitive synchronized swimming, something of which I had been doing already for 20 years and had many great masters that I had learned from myself. So if you are not going to be a teacher in life, you could always start by talking about something that you really have knowledge about. And it doesn't have to be important. If you're trying to, say, get these initial skills, what is something you totally geek out on? Maybe it's Lord of the Rings, for example. I love Lord of the Rings, but I have some Lord of the Rings geek friends that have they know every single detail of the lore and the Silmarillion, someone will put in the comments, the Silmarillion. It's like this whole other book that's like the pre-universe to the Lord of the Rings. And there's just, you could talk for hundreds of hours because there's so many crazy details that this author, Tolkien, put into these worlds. And some people just love it so much and they're so passionate and they geek out on so much and they can talk about it for hours. And So start with that. Start with, if you're really wanting to get better at speaking and you're not going to give a talk on Lord of the Rings at, say, work, if you need to give a presentation on finance or whatever, but if you've got some geeky friends and you want to talk about that, or Star Wars, or something less exciting but more important that you know a lot about, like, say, global warming, or maybe you're a history buff, whatever. Start by talking about something that you really, really have a lot of knowledge on, because it will be natural and easy to communicate that information. And you couple the passion and knowledge with your previous skills that you're gaining in vocabulary and writing, and things will start to flow in a natural, easy manner. If you're talking about something you're super passionate about, it's probably not difficult to shut you up in a good way. If you're talking, when you're passionate about something and you also have knowledge in it, it's going to flow out of you very easily. Say if you're having a conversation over dinner with friends about, maybe it's a political issue you feel very strongly about in your heart, you're not going to have to think or hum and haw or draft it out in your head. You're just going to talk because you have knowledge and passion and interest in it. So if you want to bridge the gap between that and something you have to give a public speech about, say at work, it's a PowerPoint presentation on something you're not overly passionate about, but it's your job. You can start by even just having the awareness of, when you're having these conversations of things that you're passionate and interested about, see how things flow out of you, and then see how that can translate into speaking about something that maybe you're not as passionate about, but you have knowledge about. So if you do have an impending speech coming up in the future, absolutely know as much about it as you can. Not everyone will know everything about everything. We're all humans, we're all imperfect, and we all have our own limitations as to what we can know about something, but you can certainly always increase your knowledge about something, and that's going to make it a lot easier to start to speak about it. For example, when I've been talking about the various topics that I talk about on this channel, most of my videos are 20 to 30 minutes long, and they're not scripted. I am just going off of inner information, but it's all stuff that I've been either practicing or experiencing or studying for 10 or 20 or 30 years. It's not difficult for me to speak about minimalism because it's been a cardinal point of my life for many years now. But if I were to try and give a YouTube video talk, say about quantum physics, which I just mentioned, it's something I have interest in and I'm fascinated by, but my only experience of it is like the movie Interstellar, which sort of talks about it, and then hearing about like black holes. But as far as knowledge, it's minimal, zilch, zero. I am basically totally inept on that subject. So if I were to try and speak about it for 20 minutes, it would not be a very good video. Most people would turn it off and say, this chick has no idea what she's talking about it. So being really knowledgeable about something and becoming a teacher really is a way to, they say when you teach, you learn. When you teach, you can really enforce that knowledge. So whether it is starting out by giving a lecture on Lord of the Rings lore to a group of friends, or studying and then practicing giving a talk on something, or say you want to really reinforce your ability to speak to a group, maybe you can volunteer as a teacher for something you're great at. Maybe you're great at gardening or knitting, and you can volunteer in your community to start teaching on those things. That's a great way, if you're not going to be a professional teacher, but that's a great way to get in front of a group and start speaking about something you're super knowledgeable at, and they'll be able to receive it. Similarly with performing, maybe a lot of you are, I would say probably most of you, being in Cirque du Soleil or being a go-go dancer in Las Vegas or a competitive synchronized swimmer is not in the cards for you this lifetime. You could do things like volunteer at your local community theater and do a Shakespeare play, which may sound terrifying, but it's just for fun. So that could be a great way to get exposure of being on stage and that experience of communicating in front of a group of people. Moving on to number 4, another sort of point in my career that really furthered my ability to speak to lots of different kinds of people in lots of different ways was working in restaurants. I have to deal with hundreds, sometimes thousands of people a day, depending how busy it is. And I started working in restaurants about 10 years ago, about the same time I started teaching. So it was a lot of talking. I would talk to people in restaurants all day and then talk to kids all night. So sometimes like 14 hours a day of speaking. And while it would make my voice a little raspy sometimes, it did sort of just continue to break the ice on my my fear of speaking to people to where now I'm not scared of it at all. And even though I'm not a natural introvert and like to have a lot of quiet and alone time, which has been further pushed in that direction from these hypersocial professions, I don't get social anxiety anymore, and I don't have fear of going up to a stranger and starting a conversation because it became my job. And at first it can feel a little bit awkward, but there is, sort of a script of things you have to talk about in restaurants, like figuring out what they would like to eat or whatever, but it does always naturally flow, especially now that I'm a bartender and they're there all the time, and sometimes I end up being their therapist. It often flows into organic conversation, and it's when you do something, repetition's the mother of skill, right? So your first day as a server, it may seem awkward and scary, but after years of it, it will become extremely natural to talk to people. So that's something I could recommend too, if you really do want to become better at not just public speaking for the sake of you think you have to give this big important speech someday, but you just have social anxiety and fear of interacting with people or strangers or big groups or whatever. If you want to make some extra cash, restaurant hours are always flexible. That's how I was able to pay off my debt, actually. I have other finance videos about that, but if you want some extra cash and some great physical activity and just experience with talking to a lot of different people from oftentimes all over the world, because a lot of tourists will come to restaurants, that's a great way to break the ice further and just get really used to talking to people, lots of different people on a daily basis, to where it won't be so scary anymore. Okay, so those are sort of the 4 kind of career trajectories that helped it become a lot more natural for me to speak to people. The next 5 points I have are more sort of just best practices that I found from personal development work that I've been working on for self-healing and self-development over the past, I would say 20-ish years now, that I didn't set out with this initial goal of, I want to become a great public speaker. And I don't even know if I would call myself a great public speaker right now. I would say I'm effective and doing a decent job at reaching a decent amount of people, but I can always improve. Absolutely. There's always room to grow. But it just sort of happened as I was applying these practices to other parts of my life, that they enhanced my ability to communicate with people. And over the past year that I've had this channel, applying these things and just getting the practice of speaking to an iPhone, which is weird, but applying these things has sort of solidified this ability of mine to communicate. Okay, so what are they? Be super knowledgeable about what you talk about. I sort of just mentioned that with teaching, but just to reiterate, if you turn on the camera, say you're wanting to start a YouTube channel, or you're getting in front of a group and you start talking about XYZ, if it's something you don't really know a lot about, maybe that's time to, if you're in a conversation, that would be a great time to just listen and receive and learn. Because no one likes a total bullshit artist. If you're speaking about something you don't really know about, it's not going to be effective communication, and you're not really going to give anything of value to your audience. So if you do have a talk coming up that you need to give for school or for work or whatever, study up and know what the heck you're talking about so you can deliver it much more effectively. Next, bullets versus scripts. I mentioned earlier, I do not do full scripts for my videos. A lot of YouTubers do, no hate. Everyone's got their own methodology for it, their own process, whatever. That's why a lot of people will do jump cuts in a video, because they'll say one part of the script and then they have to look at their notes and then they adjust it or whatever, and then they'll say the next part because they want it to be clear and flawless like a movie or documentary would. That's fine, that's cool, that's not my jam. But if you're giving a live talk to a live audience, that's definitely not something you can do. And for me, it started out just kind of more because I don't like editing. I'm not a computer whiz, and I don't have the time and patience for really fancy editing. That's why my videos did start out in this format. But I found very early on that, one, it felt much more organic and authentic for myself, and actually it felt much more organic and authentic for the audience. People have enjoyed sort of this kind of one-on-one conversation that is littered with a lot more ums and ahs or pauses, but that's how it is in real life. It's going to feel a lot more just organic and like authentic communication that way. If you're going off of a strict script and strictly reading it verbatim, it may be written out very beautifully and have lots of great vocabulary and be formatted exactly perfect, but it's not necessarily going to be the most effective or impactful delivery, because it's when the human connection, the human exchange of energy and of heart is so much more powerful than just words. So when you are speaking from the heart and speaking from a place of more just sort of natural impulse, I think it will have, once you're practiced and knowledgeable with what you're speaking about, I always think that's going to have a much more impactful exchange with you and your audience and be just a lot more easy to listen to versus just someone sitting and writing. And it also leaves room for spontaneity and creativity and flow to come through in that moment. So going completely blind with no plan will probably all get you stuck into walls and get you tangled and kind of lost. So I do recommend having a bullet point out. Like I'll give you an example. This is what today's looks like, just a couple bullets, a couple pages that I've been going off of, and I'm 30 minutes in now. If you're still with me, thank you. Having a little, like just a couple bullet points to reference so you stay on track, but then leaving the rest to organic flow and spirit and spontaneity coming through you. I think that's going to be a much more interesting delivery. Next, self-trust, self-confidence. I have a lot of older videos on this. One is the most important person to love. Another is, how I deal with emotional clutter. There's a few other ones if you feel like scouting through those that take a deeper dive into my own personal process of finding self-confidence in myself. Oh, another one is Own Your Energy, Lessons Learned from Being a Go-Go Dancer in Las Vegas. That one is probably the most deep dive into self-confidence and self-trust. A lot of people really struggle with these. They're not things we're necessarily taught in school. And if you're going on stage having to give a talk in front of a bunch of people, but you have zero self-confidence or belief in yourself, you're probably going to run into walls and feel terrified up there and stutter and get frozen and just totally shut down. Like if anyone's seen videos of those goats when they get scared, they like freeze and fall over. If you've never seen that, it's really sad but really cute. They're okay, they get up. It's just this weird evolutionary thing in goats, but that could happen to people on stage if you don't believe in yourself. So do in tandem with becoming a better writer and increasing your vocabulary and increasing your ability to deliver just your vernacular in a way that makes sense. You need to come from a place of self-confidence and self-worth and trusting yourself, because that's absolutely, when you trust yourself and have confidence in yourself that you have something to say, the audience is going to be much more inclined to be like, okay, yes, this is a person in some kind of authority that I would like to listen to and receive this information. Which brings me to point number 8, presence. This kind of comes along with the stage experience I have, that kind of presence, but on a physical and energetic level. But this one, specifically what I'm talking about here, is mental presence. And if you have a cluttered mind and you're thinking about 8 million different things at once and then also trying to give a speech, you're probably going to run into some troubles and you will get lost, or what you will be saying is incoherent, and the fabric of the large big picture that you're trying to deliver will be just frayed in a bunch of different directions. So doing meditation, mindfulness, daily practices to reduce stimulus and calm your mind is going to give you a lot more clarity and just ability to be in the moment and deliver and speak on what you need to deliver. I do have a video titled How I Broke My Addiction to Stimulus, if you want to check that out, or also Silence, Solitude, and Extreme Minimalism, Why I Live Like a Monk. Those take deep dives into sort of my unraveling of addiction to constant stimulus and my ability to sit more, and my desire to sit more in just stillness and calmness and silence and presence. And that has absolutely affected positively my way to communicate information, because as I'm doing these videos and speaking, I'm not off in a million directions in my head. I'm here in the moment, just connected to what I want to say. Which brings me to my final point. What do I have written here? Authenticity. Couldn't read my own writing. Sometimes that'll happen. And again, if you're giving a talk like this and a moment like that happens where you sort of fumble, like, we're human. It's okay to sort of break the third wall, the fourth wall. What's that term from acting? Breaking the fourth wall, and connect with your audience as a human being. And you can be playful in those moments. Don't freak out and be like, oh my God, I just had to check my notes and I wasn't sure what I wrote. Like, no, okay, I checked my notes and I had scratchy handwriting, and we can have humor in that and then just move on to your talk, which if you have presence and self-confidence, you can do. Authenticity. When I am giving a talk, whether it is to my students or to a parent meeting for my students or to my guests at a restaurant or to my friends or to my family or to people in the comments section or to this iPhone, which is essentially anywhere from 3 to 10 or 50,000, whatever my upper limit views are these days, or it could go anywhere, who knows, whatever the algorithm does. Whoever I'm speaking to, my voice is essentially the same. My tone is the same, my energy is the same, the words I am using are the same, and my personality is the same. And while there's always going to be variances and gradiences based on, if I'm talking to a guest and in the moment they're very angry because their salmon was overcooked, I'm gonna raise my voice a little bit and be more apologetic because that's my job. If I'm with my students, I'm not going to use curse words, versus if I'm with my friends, yes, curse words come out sometimes. There's always going to be little nuances, but for the most part, me, who I am, Alicia, is going to be the same. And I think that's been an effective tool for communication for me, because we've all watched movies where there's bad acting and it's just totally cringe. And if someone's giving a speech and they're just not really embodying in who they are, the most potent version of themselves, and they're trying to be something else to someone, whether it's sounding smarter or overly compassionate or overly strong or overly aggressive or overly capitalist or whatever. If you're trying to be something other than you are, people are going to pick up on that. And not only is it going to make your message not resonate with them as much, it's also going to be very uncomfortable and exhausting for you. And it's just going to, again, back to the word natural, it's just not going to feel natural, and it's not going to be the most potent exchange of energy that you can have with your audience. Versus if you're just you're embodying in who you uniquely are and what you uniquely have to offer, and speak as you would, whether it's your boyfriend or a crowd of 1,000 or a 5-year-old or your dog or you're at a presentation at work, whoever. Just be you and speak how it is natural for you to speak. You're going to have a much higher probability of your message being received in a potent and impactful way. Okay, now that I am 37 minutes in, if you're still with me, thank you for listening to all of this. Let me know if this resonated or if this was just a totally hypocritical video on why I'm a good public speaker and you think this was bad public speaking. That would be sad, but also very funny, but I hope that's not the case. Let me know in the comments if you are hoping to improve your public speaking and if anything in this video helped. Other than that, thank you for listening today, my friends, and I'll see you in the next video.